The smell of stale grease and broken dreams hit me like a slap across the face as I pushed through the McDonald's bathroom door, my hands trembling so violently I could barely turn the lock. The fluorescent light above flickered with that maddening buzz that always made my headaches worse, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that matched exactly how I felt inside. I pressed my back against the cold metal door and let the tears I'd been holding back for the past 20 minutes finally fall, each one carrying with it another piece of my already shattered dignity. Fat cow, the words echoed in my mind like a broken record player, stuck on the worst song ever written. Those two words, spat at me by a customer who couldn't have been older than 16, had cut deeper than any knife ever could. I'd been taking his order, trying to be pleasant despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. When he looked me up and down with disgust and said it loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "How can someone let themselves get this fat? It's disgusting. No wonder you're working at McDonald's." The worst part wasn't even the words themselves. It was the silence that followed, the way everyone in that restaurant just stared at me, some with pity, others with that horrible mixture of curiosity and revulsion that I'd grown so familiar with over the years. Not one person said anything, not one person defended me. I was just the fat girl behind the counter, and apparently that made me fair game for anyone's cruelty. I slumped down onto the toilet seat and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper from my apron pocket. My resume, the 47th copy I'd printed at the library, spending money I couldn't afford on ink and paper, hoping against hope that this time would be different. This time someone would see past my appearance and recognize the mind behind it. This time I wouldn't come home empty-handed with another rejection story to break my mother's heart. Just a little bit more. My name is Magnolia Celestine Ravenscroft, and I'm 24 years old, which feels ancient when all my high school classmates are posting pictures on social media of their promotions, their engagements, their perfect little lives that seem to exist in a completely different universe. For mine, I live in Corktown, Detroit, in a house with paper peeling off the walls and heating that fails more often than it works. But it's filled with love and books and the kind of determination that poverty can't break. Have you ever felt completely invisible while simultaneously feeling like everyone is staring at you? That's what my life had become. I was too big to ignore but too different to include. Trapped in this strange limbo where I was both the center of unwanted attention and completely overlooked for everything that mattered. My family is the reason I get up every morning and put myself through this humiliation. My mother, Esperanza Dolores Ravenscroft, had been a nurse before her arthritis got so bad that she could barely hold a coffee cup, let alone care for patients. She'd raised my brother Timothy and me alone after Dad died in that factory accident when I was 12, working double shifts and sacrificing everything to make sure we had what we needed. Timothy is 16 now, brilliant in ways that most people can't understand or appreciate. He's autistic, sees patterns and numbers that make no sense to anyone else, can solve complex equations in his head while struggling to make eye contact or understand why people say things they don't mean. He's been my best friend and my responsibility for as long as I can remember, and I'd gladly spend the rest of my life protecting him from a world that doesn't have the patience to see how extraordinary he is. That morning's interview had been a disaster from the moment I walked through the door. Margaret Pemberton, the hiring manager whose name I'll never forget, was one of those women who probably hadn't eaten a full meal since 1987. All sharp angles and designer clothes that cost more than my family's monthly rent. When I introduced myself, she literally took a step back, as if my mere presence might somehow contaminate her perfectly curated world. The interview was a joke from that moment on. She asked me about my qualifications while clearly not listening to my answers, her eyes constantly drifting to my body with barely concealed disgust. When I mentioned my degree in literature with a minor in business administration, she actually looked surprised, as if she couldn't believe someone my size was capable of academic achievement. But sitting in that bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. There was fire. There was determination. There was a woman who was tired of being treated like she was less than human just because she took up more space in the world. I was going to try one more time, but this time I was going to do something I'd never done before. I was going to tell the truth. The idea terrified me and exhilarated me in equal measure. Every career counselor, every advice article, every well-meaning friend had told me to keep my personal life out of my professional applications. Don't mention your struggles, they said. Don't give them reasons to discriminate against you. But what if my story wasn't a liability, but an asset? What if what they needed was someone who understood struggle, who knew how to persevere when everything was working against them, who could find strength in situations that would break other people? I didn't sleep that night. How could I, when my entire future was spreading itself across notebook pages in handwriting that grew more confident with each word? I sat at our kitchen table until the sun started creeping through the curtains, pouring my soul onto paper in a way I'd never dared before. I wrote about watching my father's strength fade in a hospital bed while 12-year-old me tried to figure out how to be brave for a mother who was falling apart and a brother who couldn't understand why daddy wouldn't wake up. I wrote about the first time someone called me fat at school, how I'd gone home and stood in front of the mirror trying to see what they saw, wondering if there was something fundamentally wrong with me that I'd never noticed. I wrote about learning to make myself small in every way except the one that mattered to everyone else. How I'd perfected the art of taking up as little space as possible in conversations, in classrooms, in life itself, trying to compensate for the space my body occupied by making my presence as unobtrusive as possible. But I also wrote about the strength I'd discovered in those dark places, how losing my father had taught me that life was fragile and precious, and not to be wasted on other people's expectations. How caring for Timothy had shown me that love didn't come with conditions or requirements, that the most beautiful souls often came in packages the world didn't know how to appreciate. When the library opened, I was the first person through the doors. I settled in at a computer in the back corner and started typing, transforming my handwritten words into something official, something that could change everything at the top. My name and contact information looked exactly like any other resume, but then, where most people would list their objective or summary, I wrote something that felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. I have survived 10 years of bullying that started in elementary school and followed me through high school, where I learned that the world judges books by their covers, but that the most valuable stories are often found in the volumes no one bothers to open. I have survived losing my father at 12 years old and watching my family struggle through grief and financial hardship, which taught me that strength isn't about not falling down, it's about getting back up every single time. I have survived working 3 jobs while maintaining a 3.9 GPA in college, because dreams don't pause for poverty, and determination doesn't require a trust fund. I have survived 46 job rejections this year alone, each one a masterclass in resilience, and a reminder that the right opportunity is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when no one else does. My hands were shaking as I typed the next paragraph. If you are looking for someone who understands what it means to work harder than everyone else, just to get half the recognition, someone who finds solutions others miss, because adversity has taught them to see opportunities where others see obstacles, someone who brings the kind of authenticity and determination that can't be taught or faked, then I am exactly who you need. Sterling Technology was downtown, in one of those gleaming office buildings that made me feel like I was stepping into a different universe. I'd researched the company obsessively, reading about their innovative approach to data management and their young CEO, who'd built the business from nothing. The receptionist looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. All perfect hair and designer clothes. When I approached her desk, she looked me up and down in a way that was supposed to be subtle but felt like being examined under a microscope. I'd like to submit a resume for the administrative assistant position, I said. You can submit applications online through our website, she said, her voice becoming noticeably cooler. For security reasons, all applications must be submitted through our online portal. Security reasons. As if my resume might contain anthrax instead of hope. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but I wasn't giving up. Not this time. I spent the afternoon in a coffee shop across the street, watching the Sterling Technology building like I was conducting surveillance. At 5:30, I watched the building empty, but some lights stayed on in the upper floors. The offices of people who worked late, who cared enough about their jobs to stay past closing time. At 6 o'clock, I walked back across the street, through those intimidating glass doors, straight to the elevator bank like I belonged there. The Sterling Technology offices were behind glass doors. With their logo etched in clean modern letters, the door was locked, but there was a mail slot. For a moment I hesitated. Once I pushed my resume through that slot, there was no taking it back. It would exist in their world, with my name on it and my truth written in black and white. But then I thought about Timothy, about his absolute faith in the power of truth and logic. I thought about Mom, sleeping fitfully at home while her body betrayed her a little more each day. I pushed the resume through the mail slot and listened to it flutter to the floor on the other side. What I didn't know was that at 11:30 at night, while I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, a man named Dimitri Alexander Sterling would be pacing the floors of his empty office building, unable to sleep. I didn't know that he would notice the stack of mail on the reception desk and, in a moment of restless curiosity, decide to flip through it himself. I couldn't have known that when he unfolded my resume and read those first few lines about survival and strength, his hands would start to shake, that he would have to sit down and read it again, and then again. Because the words on that page were speaking directly to parts of his own story that he'd never told anyone. Dimitri Alexander Sterling had built his company from nothing, but his nothing was different from mine. His nothing was an orphanage, where he'd learned that survival meant being tougher than everyone else, smarter than everyone else, and never ever letting anyone see weakness. He'd been adopted at 14 by Cornelius Blackwood Sterling, a businessman who'd seen potential in an angry kid with a brilliant mind and the determination to prove the world wrong. When he read my words about getting back up every single time, about working harder than everyone else, just to get half the recognition, about finding opportunities where others saw obstacles, he saw his own story reflected back at him, but where his journey had led to success and wealth, and the kind of power that made people listen when he spoke. Mine had led to McDonald's uniforms and rejection letters, and the daily humiliation of being invisible. He spent the rest of that night researching me, finding my address, my work schedule, everything he could learn about the woman who'd written words that had shaken him to his core. And when he discovered I worked at McDonald's, he made a decision that would change both our lives forever. The next morning, it was raining hard when he walked into my restaurant. I noticed him immediately, partly because he was soaking wet and partly because he looked like he belonged in a completely different universe from the one I inhabited. Tall, probably early 30s, with dark hair plastered to his head and clothes that were obviously expensive despite being thoroughly drenched. "What can I get for you?" I asked when he approached my register. He studied the menu, but I got the impression he wasn't really reading it. "Coffee, black, and what would you recommend?" The question surprised me. Nobody asked the girl behind the counter for recommendations. "Are you looking for breakfast or lunch?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. I haven't been sleeping well lately, so I'm not entirely certain what meal this counts as." There was something in his voice, a tired honesty that made me want to take care of him. "If you haven't been sleeping, you probably need something with protein. The breakfast burrito is actually pretty good." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. "The breakfast burrito it is, and thank you for the recommendation. You have excellent customer service instincts." But instead of moving to the waiting area, he lingered at the counter. "Do you mind if I ask you something? You seem like someone who reads, am I right?" "What makes you think that?" "The way you explained the breakfast burrito. You told a story instead of just listing ingredients. You painted a picture of someone who needed comfort food without knowing it, and you offered a solution that felt personal rather than commercial. That's not customer service training. That's the mind of someone who understands narrative." I stared at him, feeling like he'd somehow looked inside my head and seen things I'd never told anyone. "You're very observant. What's the last book that kept you up all night because you couldn't put it down?" The question was so unexpected that I forgot to be guarded. "The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I started it on a Sunday afternoon and didn't stop reading until I finished it at 3 in the morning. His face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Taylor Jenkins Reid. She has this incredible ability to make you fall in love with characters who are fundamentally flawed, but completely human." "What did you think about the ending?" Not only had he read the book, but he wanted to discuss it, like we were in some kind of impromptu book club. "I thought it was perfect," I said, forgetting entirely that there were other customers waiting. "The way she revealed Evelyn's truth gradually, making you question everything you thought you knew about her story." "Exactly. And the way she showed that love isn't always what it looks like from the outside. That sometimes the most important relationships are the ones that don't fit into society's neat little categories." We talked about the book for another 10 minutes, discussing character development and narrative structure, and the way certain authors could make you feel like you knew their fictional creations better than you knew real people. I forgot that I was wearing a uniform that marked me as someone whose opinions weren't supposed to matter. Have you ever had a conversation that made you feel like you'd been holding your breath for years without realizing it? Like someone had finally given you permission to be yourself, instead of the version of yourself that the world expected to see. "I'm sorry," I said finally, noticing that the line behind him had grown significantly longer. "I should probably get back to work." "Of course." Thank you for the book talk. It's been a while since I've had a conversation about literature with someone who actually understands what makes a story powerful. His order came up then, but instead of taking his food and leaving, he did something that made my heart perform. An acrobatic routine. I don't suppose you'd be interested in continuing this conversation sometime when you're not working. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Men didn't ask me out. The idea that this intelligent, attractive, obviously successful man might actually want to spend time with me felt like something out of a fantasy novel. I realized this is probably completely inappropriate, he said quickly. I just enjoyed talking with you, and I thought maybe we could grab coffee sometime and discuss whatever you're reading next. Coffee, as if we were equals, as if my thoughts and opinions were worth his time. The offer was so tempting it physically hurt to consider turning it down. That's very kind of you, I said carefully, but I'm sure you're busy, ... We're all busy. The question is whether we're too busy for the things that might make us happy. There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him more carefully, searching his face for signs of mockery or pity. But what I saw instead was sincerity, and something that looked almost like loneliness. Can I think about it? I asked, of course. But just so you know, the offer comes with no expectations and no pressure. Just to people who happen to love books, talking about stories over coffee. He pulled out his phone. If you decide you'd like to take me up on it, you can reach me here. I took his phone and entered my number, my hands shaking slightly. When I handed it back to him, our fingers brushed for just a moment, and I felt that electric connection again. I'm David, by the way, he said. Magnolia, like the tree, like the Faulkner story. The reference made me smile, despite my nervousness. Of course he would know Faulkner. My grandmother loved that story. She said she wanted me to have a name that was both beautiful and strong. She chose well, he said, and the way he said my name made it sound like something precious. He left then, taking his breakfast and his warmth and his inexplicable interest in my thoughts about literature. I watched him through the window as he walked to his car, a sleek silver sedan that probably cost more than my family's house. Walking home through the gray February afternoon, I replayed every moment of our interaction. Had he been genuine, or just being polite? Had his interest been real, or was he the kind of person who collected interesting stories about his encounters with people from different social classes? That night, lying in bed and listening to the rain still falling outside my window, I stared at my phone and thought about the text I could send. Something casual. Something that acknowledged his invitation without seeming too eager or too desperate. What I didn't know was that David wasn't David at all, but Dmitry Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Technology. I didn't know that he'd spent his evening researching the woman who'd served him breakfast, confirming what he'd suspected from the moment he'd read my resume, that I was exactly the kind of person his company needed. I didn't know that our conversation about books had proved something he'd believed from reading my words. About survival and strength, that I was exactly the kind of mind that could see solutions others missed. Exactly the kind of authentic determination that couldn't be taught or faked. All I knew was that for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone had looked at me and seen something worth knowing. Someone had asked me questions and listened to my answers like they mattered. Someone had made me feel, for just a few minutes, like the smart, interesting person I'd always known. I was inside but had learned to keep hidden from a world that preferred simple categories to complex truths. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was a woman named Maria Rodriguez from Sterling Technology, calling to offer me an interview for a position I'd never applied for. We were very impressed with your unconventional application, she said. Mr. Sterling would like to meet with you personally. Mr. Sterling, the CEO, wanted to meet with me personally. I almost dropped the phone. Yes, of course. When would be convenient? Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, if that works for you. And Ms. Ravenscroft. Mr. Sterling specifically asked me to tell you that this interview is about what you can bring to our team, not about checking boxes or meeting expectations. He's looking for authentic strength and innovative thinking, and he believes you might be exactly what we need. After I hung up, I sat in our kitchen staring at the phone like it might disappear if I looked away. An interview with the CEO of Sterling Technology. A chance to prove that my resume wasn't just words on paper, but a promise of what I could accomplish if someone would just give me the opportunity. I thought about David and wondered if I should text him about this incredible turn of events. We'd exchanged a few messages since our conversation at McDonald's. Casual book recommendations and thoughts about stories we'd both loved. He'd been charming and thoughtful, and I'd found myself looking forward to his texts more than I probably should have. but this felt like something I needed to do on my own. Something that belonged to the professional side of my life rather than the tentative personal connection I was building with a man who made me feel like my thoughts and opinions mattered. The next day, I dressed in my best outfit and took the bus downtown to Sterling Technology. This time, when I walked through those glass doors, I wasn't sneaking in or pushing resumes through mail slots. I was expected. I belonged there, at least for the next hour. The receptionist who'd dismissed me so coldly just days earlier now greeted me with professional courtesy. "Ms. Ravenscroft, Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 18th floor." The 18th floor was executive territory. All polished wood and expensive art, and the kind of quiet confidence that came with real success. Maria Rodriguez met me at the elevator, a warm woman in her 40s who made me feel immediately at ease. "Magnolia, I'm so glad you could come in. Mr. Sterling has been very much looking forward to meeting you." She led me down a hallway lined with photographs of the company's history. From its humble beginnings in a garage to its current status as one of Detroit's most innovative tech companies. At the end of the hall was a door marked Dimitri A. Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. Ms. Rodriguez knocked and opened the door. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Ravenscroft is here. Please send her in." I stepped into the office, and my world tilted on its axis. Because sitting behind that massive desk, rising to greet me with a smile that looked both nervous and hopeful, was David. The man who'd asked me about books and listened to my thoughts about literature like they mattered. The man who'd made me feel seen and valued and worthy of attention. Dimitri Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Technology. The man who'd read my desperate resume and somehow found in it exactly what he'd been looking for. "Hello, Magnolia," he said. And his voice was exactly the same as it had been when he'd ordered coffee and a breakfast burrito. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." I stood there in the doorway, my mind reeling as pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed suddenly clicked into place. The way he'd found me at McDonald's. The conversation about books that had felt too perfect to be accidental. The interest in my thoughts and opinions that had seemed too good to be true. "You read my resume," I said, and it wasn't a question. I did. And then I had to meet the person who'd written it. The person who understood that survival and strength and authenticity were qualifications that mattered more than anything that could be learned in a classroom or polished in an interview. So our conversation at McDonald's was me trying to confirm what I'd suspected from your words? That you were exactly the kind of person I'd been looking for. Exactly the kind of mind that could help build something extraordinary. I felt tears starting to form. And I didn't know if they were from embarrassment or relief or something else entirely. "I don't understand. Why go through all that? Why not just call me for an interview?" He stepped out from behind his desk, and I could see vulnerability in his expression that matched what I was feeling. Because I needed to know if the person who'd written those words was real. Because I've learned that the most valuable people are often the ones who've been overlooked by everyone else. And because honestly, I was curious about someone who could find hope and strength in places where most people only see obstacles. Like and subscribe if you've ever felt like your biggest struggles might actually be your greatest strengths. Because what happened next would prove that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is also the bravest. And that the right person will see your truth, not as weakness, but as exactly what they've been searching for. "Magnolia," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "I'd like to offer you a position here. Not because I feel sorry for you, not because I want to rescue you, but because your resume told me everything I needed to know about how you think and what you're capable of. And our conversation at McDonald's confirmed that you're exactly the kind of innovative, authentic person this company needs." I stared at him, this man who'd somehow seen value in my story when everyone else had seen only reasons to reject me. This man who'd taken the time to find me, to talk to me, to confirm that my words were backed up by the person who'd written them. "What kind of position?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Strategic assistant to the executive team. You'd be working directly with me and the other senior leaders, helping us see problems from different angles, bringing your perspective to decisions that affect the entire company. It's not an entry-level position, Magnolia. It's a role for someone who understands both struggle and triumph. Someone who can think creatively because they've had to find solutions where others saw only problems." The salary he quoted made me dizzy. It was more money than my family had ever dreamed of, enough to get Mom the medical care she needed, enough to secure Timothy's future, enough to lift us out of the cycle of poverty that had defined our lives for so long. But more than the money, it was the recognition, The acknowledgement that my mind, my perspective, my hard-won wisdom had value, that my story wasn't something to hide or apologize for, but something that made me uniquely qualified to help build something beautiful. I started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "You don't have to answer right now," he said gently. "Take time to think about it. Talk to your family. But Magnolia, I want you to know that this offer isn't charity. It's an investment in someone I believe can help change how this company approaches problems and opportunities." I thought about Timothy, with his beautiful mind that saw patterns others missed. I thought about Mom, who'd sacrificed everything to give us chances she'd never had. I thought about Dad, who'd taught me that courage meant doing the right thing, even when your hands were shaking. "I don't need time to think about it," I said, and my voice was stronger than I'd expected it to be. Yes, I accept." His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face, the same way it had in McDonald's, when we'd talked about books and stories and the power of authentic characters. "Welcome to Sterling Technology, Magnolia. I have a feeling you're going to help us see possibilities we never knew existed." As I left that building that day, walking through those same glass doors that had seemed so intimidating just weeks earlier, I felt like I was stepping into a completely different life, not because my circumstances had changed, though they had, but because someone had finally seen the value in what I'd always known I could offer. Have you ever had a moment when you realized that everything you'd been through, all the pain and struggle and rejection, had been preparing you for something extraordinary? When you understood that your story wasn't a series of obstacles, but a foundation for something beautiful? That night, I went home to Corktown, to our little house with its peeling wallpaper and failing heat. And I told my family that everything was about to change. Not just our financial situation, though that would improve dramatically, but our sense of what was possible, our understanding of what happened when someone finally recognized that strength comes in many forms, and that the most valuable perspectives often belong to people who've learned to find light in dark places. Mom cried when I told her she'd finally be able to get the medical care she needed. Timothy smiled his gentle smile and said that change in variables often produced better outcomes, and that he was proud of me for being brave enough to write my truth. And later, as I sat in my room looking at my phone, I composed a text message to David, or rather, to Dimitri, the man who'd somehow known that I was worth finding, worth knowing, worth believing in. "Thank you," I wrote, "for seeing me." His response came almost immediately. "Thank you for being worth seeing." 6 months later, I was thriving in a career that challenged me every day and rewarded me, not despite my background, but because of it. My perspective, shaped by struggle and honed by necessity, helped Sterling Technology approach problems in ways that saved them money and opened new opportunities. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was contributing to something bigger than myself. And Dimitri, he became more than my boss. He became my partner in every sense of the word. Someone who understood that love meant seeing the best in each other and helping that best version flourish. Our relationship built slowly, founded on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to overcome obstacles that others couldn't imagine. Our wedding was small, held in the community center in Corktown, because that's where our story had really begun, not in his office or at McDonald's, but in the choices we'd both made to keep believing in ourselves when the world suggested we shouldn't. The most important lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about resume writing or job hunting or even about finding love in unexpected places. It was about the power of authentic truth, about what happens when you stop trying to be what others expect and start being exactly who you are. Sometimes the most desperate acts of courage plant seeds that grow into something beautiful. Sometimes the qualities that make you different are exactly what someone else has been searching for. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to tell your story honestly, you discover that it wasn't just your story after all. It was the beginning of something much bigger, much more beautiful, much more extraordinary than you ever dared to imagine today. I run a foundation that helps people from backgrounds like mine find opportunities in industries that have traditionally overlooked them. Timothy works with our tech team, his mathematical mind helping us solve problems in ways that amaze even our most experienced engineers. Mom has the medical care she needs and a beautiful garden, where she grows the flowers she always dreamed of tending, and every morning, when I wake up in our home that's filled with books and love and the kind of security I never thought we'd have, I remember the girl who sat in a McDonald's bathroom, crying over a resume that contained more hope than qualification. I remember the moment I decided to stop hiding and start fighting. I remember the power of one honest line that changed everything, that surviving is a qualification, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer the world is simply the truth of who you are. Because at the end of the day, we're all just stories waiting to be told honestly, authentically, and with the kind of courage that comes from understanding that our struggles don't define our limitations. They reveal our limitless potential to overcome, to grow, and to help others see that there's always hope. Always possibility, always a chance for something beautiful to grow from the darkest soil.